Okay, so my name is ZOiD. This is ZOiD's YouTube channel, and I make videos on whatever I want. And you know what? I've been watching some YouTube channels myself, and I've been thinking, you know what would make my channel grow more? Is if normally I just talk about songs I really like. I Aphex Twin, Square Pusher, Otekra, I look at tracks, I analyze them, my favorite music. I'm all like, this is great, that's great. And I'm basically always talking about stuff I like. And I was thinking there, what if I talk about stuff that I don't like and how bad it is? And I actually started looking for something to talk about how I think is bad. You know, it's more of a controversial take, tongue-in-cheek, whatever. But, you know, I just couldn't find anything that I could be bothered talking about that I don't like. You know, there's pop stuff or whatever, just like really commercial stuff that I don't like. But I honestly don't think it's bad. Like, it's just different. It's whatever. Someone might enjoy to listen to it, but not me. So let them enjoy it. And I don't want to bother saying it's bad, because I rarely listen to something and think, what a load of crap that is. You know, it's just not the way that I've been trained to listen. If I listen to something and I don't like it, which is most things that I hear, then I'm not thinking that it's bad. I'm thinking, what are the elements that I don't like in this and why? That is how I was trained to think by my teachers, many different teachers. One time, Don Byron, the great clarinetist and composer, taught me for 2 weeks in a summer course in New York in 2004 called School for Improvisational Music. We were learning, you know, it was very kind of open. It wasn't just like jazz standards or anything like that. It was very doing free improv and looking at different aspects of music. And he did a great class where he basically taught us how to listen like this objectively and played us totally different types of music and got us to hear what's good, what's bad, understand why we like things and why not. So with all of that, now I'm going to talk about something that I do not do much myself, which is sampling records, sampling old music. Why don't I do that? Okay, I tend to lean more towards Westdeutsche Rundfunk rather than Musique Concrète. So what does that mean? You know, back in the 30s, 40s, the music that was after World War II, it was the 40s, 50s is when it was. So after World War II, the state of music was changing rapidly, and a lot of modern composer type of people, they were looking for something new, and they were moving away from what they perceived as the old, which was like repetitive rhythm and kind of just marching. They, thought like they associated the repetitive rhythms with like war and marching off to war, and they were going to leave that. And tonality, even a lot of people tried to leave tonality. So in Germany, we had Stockhausen, Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. He developed like a kind of lab approach, wearing a white lab coat and working these like rigorous disciplined hours in a lab and using these kind of new inventions, oscillators, and developing sounds from like sine wave generators and oscillators. Really interesting stuff. So his approach to synthesis was create the sounds from machines, which I believe was the precursor and the ancestor of synthesis today. Music where you generate sounds from synthesizers, whether hardware or software. You generate your own sounds from synthesizers and understanding of synthesis. All of that. Additive synthesis, subtractive synthesis, all that. Over in France, you had Musique Concrète, which was Pierre Schaeffer using tape recorder technology. Tape recording had kind of made leaps and bounds over the past few years with the war and everything, and some technologies do get advanced during those times as military applications kind of, spend a lot of time and effort developing them. So Pierre Schaeffer and Musique, Concrète, they started to record sounds in around them, creaking doors or whatever like that, and try and make the tape, cut it, edit it, splice it up, whatever, so that it became a piece of music. And I was doing a master's in music and media technologies in 2005. I got introduced to these ideas, these composers, and ever since then, when I heard Musique, Concrète, I was just like, nah, it's not for me. Like, the door creaking and whatever. I was like, nah, I just prefer, not that I listen to Stockhausen, no, I don't listen to Stockhausen, but I did once go to Hymnen, a performance at the National Concert Hall in Dublin, and it was 8 speakers, I believe, 4 stereo CDs playing simultaneously, so 2 speakers for each. We were sitting on chairs, it was all around us, and I remember that blew me away. Hymnen uses national anthems and a lot of synthesis, and it's just like really spatial piece, and I really loved that. I was like, wow, it's incredible. And all the Musique, Concrète stuff, I just was like, no, whatever. And in my mind, I don't know how true this is, but the idea of recording and manipulating those recordings kind of developed into the idea of sampling, and hip hop and all of that went that way, which, don't get me wrong, is a huge art form that is to be respected and loved for sure. But everyone has their own personal tastes, and I just lean towards the synthesis, the Stockhausen, the Westdeutsche Rundfunk direction. The Westdeutsche Rundfunk was a radio station that was kind of involved with playing in the early Stockhausen stuff, and there was links between the lab and that radio station and stuff like that. So later on, Reflex and Aphex Twin and the Warp stuff, when I was in the 90s growing up and listening to all that stuff, I really loved that. And Reflex Records actually had a kind of a manifesto in one of their early releases that I had. I don't lost it, unfortunately, but it did talk about that they didn't love to sample stuff, which probably had an influence on me. Of course, Aphex is a big sampler and sampled a whole bunch of stuff, but usually very obscure. But uses breaks as well that everyone recognizes. And actually, Caleb Peinado, who released a few things on my label, ZOiD, is a great musician and music maker. He knows a massive amount about Aphex Twin's music, and he introduced me to a lot of samples that Aphex used, including in the Baby Ford Helston Flora remix, where the beats are so great. I always wanted to know how he made those beats, and they're sampled from a famous break. So this is leading me on to talk about the Orbital track Belfast, which I came across in a list of all-time great tracks, and Orbital were one of the big influential bands, acts, music makers when I was in the 90s. They were the Orbital, the Orb, Aphex Twin, all that stuff when I was going to school. I've seen Orbital a number of times. I met them a couple of times, had chats with them. They sold huge amounts of their first album. Huge amounts, like 250,000 or something ridiculous. They were huge in the 90s. So this is a very beloved track of theirs, Belfast. Starts off with these synth pads. From this digital synth Roland baby or something. And then this lovely high sine wavy floaty melody on top. Very nice. Percussion comes in. Flick forward a bit. Building up the beat. It's on the Green album. Or synthesizer. funky, funky, all building up. And then this melody and chords come in. So as soon as that comes in, I'm like, it sounds great, but I know people aren't going to like this. This is a beloved track, and you know, it's just my opinion. When that melody comes in, that was a choice Orbital made to use an existing piece of music and mash it into their track, which up to before that sample came in, I think was all synthesized sounds, and that's fine. That's like, I know some people will say that, well, the synthesizer sounds that they were using, they didn't make them. Some other programmer made those sounds on the synthesizer and they used them, so they're borrowing those sounds. But the fact is, they chose which notes those sounds would do. You know, composers for hundreds of years they haven't been inventing new instruments unless they're Hardy Parch, but mostly they just use the violin. They didn't invent the violin, but they tell the violin player what notes to play. And that's their choice, their taste. Now, at the point the melody comes in Belfast, it samples, I looked it up on who sampled, and it samples Emily Van Ivera, O Euchary, which if you look it up here, is a very beautiful piece of music. That is music by Hildegard von Bingen, Hildegard Bingen. She was alive, she was born in 1098. What? 1,000 nearly years ago. Just less than 1,000 years ago. What? Died on 17th of September, 1179. So she wrote music. She was a German Benedictine abbess and polymath writer, composer, philosopher. So you can go and look her up if you want. So this is the kind of rabbit holes you go down when you're looking at who sampled what and why and where. So they sampled this. And I think it's that first bit. Okay, so that's great and that's fine, you know. It sounds great, it makes the piece great. This piece is attributed to Richard Souther, and you look him up and he's this guy he's still alive, an American musician, composer, and he did contemporary Christian music, chant-based music, and he did this Hildegard von Bingen thing, Vision. He provided the instrumental backing, and if you look up on Discogs, you can find the credits for this album. So you've got the vocals are Emily Van Ivera, who was the singer on this track, which is why it says it there, Emily Van Ivera. Okay, fine. Now, Orbital are two brothers, Phil and Paul Hartnell, and one of them is more the composer. Which one is it? Was it Paul or Phil? I can't remember. But one of them is now a film composer. Phil Hartnell. Or was it Paul? I think it's Paul. Yeah, Paul Hartnell is the composer. Right, so he actually is writing film music now. I actually went to a workshop that he gave as he was giving it as a film composer to the Screenwriters Guild of Ireland. They have like they give composer workshops and things, master classes, and I went to that one. It was really interesting. I was chatting to him for a bit, and it was quite funny on that workshop because it was like maybe 12 or 15 composers on a Zoom session with Paul Hartnell talking about getting into writing music for film and video and stuff. And then we were asked questions and answers and stuff. And I said to him that back in like the late 90s, I went to a rave in France called the Monastery of Sound. A whole bus went from Dublin and the bus went all the way to this monastery in France. It took like 20-hour drive or something. And it was hilarious because I met one of the Orbital brothers at that rave. He was playing, and chatted to him for a while at that rave, and I always thought that it was Bill that I met. And at this workshop Q&A, I said to Paul Hartnell, I was like, I actually met your brother at a rave in France, the Monastery of Sound, in the late 90s. And Paul said, you didn't meet my brother, you met me, because my brother wasn't there. I remember that, I was there. So that was really funny. But he was a lovely guy to talk to and chat to. So he made most of the music. Most of the Orbital music was mainly him, Phil and him kind of, mixed it together or whatever, but he did most of the music making part. But, knowing him, I haven't asked him this question, but knowing him, how much, when you use someone else's melody, Hildegard von Bingen's, even though it's very old, yeah, it's up for grabs, whatever, it's not the same. I bet you anything that that he's proud of making this track and pleased with it, but in the end, the other tracks that he's made where it's been completely 100% original stuff that he composed, I bet you anything that he has a better feeling about those tracks if he has to rate it, Do you know what I mean? I don't know, people are not going to agree with me, I'm sure, about this, because sampling is such a big, huge thing. I know people spend so long digging in record shops and looking for samples, and that effort they go through to get the samples is really big. So there's there's a real feeling that you found a great sample, you used it, that is yours, you made it yours. And I agree with that. That is true. A lot of great music is made with samples. DJ Shadow, all that stuff. But I still would say I guess it's me as a jazz musician as well. When I'm playing jazz solos, I'm not quoting parts of other people's jazz solos. I'm improvising. I'm trying to improvise my own stuff. I'm not trying to do Wes Montgomery, what he did, or even John Coltrane, or, I'm trying to do me all the time. And sampling someone else and putting it in my music is not usually what the best way I think to do me. But I still do it. Don't get me wrong. I don't have a hard and fast no sampling rule. I absolutely do sample sometimes. I'm working on a track right now. I can show you the track I'm working on right now. I just started with a sample from a band called ZOiD, which I found the record on my shelf. I was like, what's this record? I never listened to it. I just bought it somewhere. I can't remember where, somewhere in America, because it had $5.99 on it, some junk store or something. So I was listening. This is a great, fantastic band, ZOiD. Wow. They're like a Brazilian band that invent their own instruments out of PVC stuff. They're amazing players. Their music's super interesting. This one has a couple of Milton Nascimento tracks, who's a great Brazilian composer, and he actually used them as his band when he's on tour and stuff. So here's a bit of I sampled the record, and this is sampled off the record, spool loop, and then add a beat, add time signature, more beats. bass line. That's all I've got so far. I want to finish it, put in a melody, whatever. So, but sampling beats is one thing though, you know, and breaks and amens and all that. Go on, do that all day. It's not the main element. It's not the melody of your track. So you put in like a bunch of chords and melodies on top of that stuff. You know, you very much got your own music there. But for Orbital Belfast, they did the backing stuff, and then the main bit of the track is that vocal lifted off of that Vision record, which I don't know, CD, whatever, I don't know where they got it. But yeah, let me just say it as clearly as possible. You know, write your own melody. Write your own melody. Don't put in someone else singing a melody. Or do, yeah, it doesn't matter. You know, we'd all love to have a track as big as Belfast, you know. That would be fantastic. But in the end, if I had a choice between having a track blow up really big, but the melody in it was something that I sampled from someone else, even if it was written 1,000 years ago, but it was recorded in the 70s, a choice between that and writing my own melody, which will be listened to in 1,000 years' time, but no one hears it when I was alive. How about that choice? Which do you choose? Like, that is, when it really gets down to it, which one do you choose? Because, you know, that's a deep question, man. That's making me like really look inside. You know, obscurity for the rest of your life. No one's going to hear it, but people will find it after you die and listen to it, you know, and even in 1,000 years, they'll listen to it, enjoy it, get benefit from it, but you won't get any benefit from it. You could have that, and you won't even know it though. What? You have to choose basically to give up on any recognition in order to do the thing that is great. You know, Hildegard von Bingen, she was a philosopher and composer and writer. So, you know, I don't know how popular she was in her lifetime, but I bet it would be hard to fathom in 1100 and whatever, that like in nearly 1,000 years, people will still be listening to her music. And then the choice is like, oh, you got a big hit of a song, but you just sampled whatever, Mozart or something. You just sampled the melody out of another great composer and whacked a beat on, and then everyone was like, woo, you're the best sampler in the world. And then, yeah, it's just a silly question, because then you could just get loads of money and work on your own stuff for the rest of your life. So it doesn't make any sense. But I'm just rambling on and on trying to explain my view of sampling. And I'm not sure if I did a good job of it, but probably I will get some different opinions, some different viewpoints. I am very much in the minority in electronic music with my view of sampling. I've had discussions with people before. My friend Dennis McNulty, I've talked about it with him, and, you know, samplings of, he thinks is great. And it actually did, I've softened my view back in like a year or two ago when I was talking to him. We had an email conversation about it, and I was pretty hard, even more hardcore over on the, now don't sample, just do your own thing. Whereas now I'm like way more on the, you do whatever you want, you do you. But to finish the video, and there is a huge other reason why, after all these musical reasons, why not sample? Another reason is because if you do make a piece of music that blows up really big, gets synced in a film, whatever, and there's an uncleared sample in it, and then that's a major legal hassle, and you got to give up royalties, and you got to clear it, and how do you do that? I've never I've never cleared a sample in something for release, and I just it's wary of that. Like, you know, even if the music was written in 1100 and whatever, if it was recorded in the 70s, someone owns the master recording, you sample it. I'd love to know on the Orbital Belfast track if they ever had to clear that sample that was used from that Vision album. I would love to know that. If not, they just lucked out and got away with it. But, you know, given that some record label probably owns that master recording, surely such a big record there would be something they have to pay. Now, of course, if you're like doing big things, you know, if you're big, then you can just afford to pay some royalties for your sample use, and your sample helps your track. But that's fine, but I'm always on the side of like, but why not make the new stuff that sounds so good that other people want to sample it? Have people sample my music that I made from scratch. And I know the whole argument of making from scratch is like limited, because like, what are you going to do? You're going to go and grow your own tree and then only use wood from the tree to make the guitar that you're going to play on, and there's a limit to all this. So I'm going around in circles. You do what you want, but what I want is I'll do a rare sample off a record, but most of the time I'll try and generate my own sounds as much as possible. Use synthesis, use microphones to do field recordings and room recordings of me playing guitars and bass and whatever, and try to get as much atmosphere and feeling into my music as I can without relying on sampling dusty old records. That's it. What do you think? Tell me.